In this video, we will learn how to prevent tilts and how to manage our emotions more effectively to stay focused. Emotions are signals. Negative emotions indicate when something is wrong. Positive emotions indicate that things are going right and we are in a position to perform well. However, sometimes our thinking isn't correctly calibrated, leading to emotions that don't serve us in our goals. When we experience a trigger, if unaddressed, we are moving toward tilt, or at best, worse performance. Tilt happens when our negative emotions become so overwhelming that a physiological response is activated and we go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. In competition, cool heads prevail, so we need to practice awareness to recognize when a trigger is activated and we're at risk of tilt. If we address a trigger straight away, this is ideal. When in-game, we typically notice the emotion first, despite it being secondary to the action. Learning to be aware and recognize which specific actions resulted in a negative emotion is an essential strategy to nip tilt in the bud. Tilt is a ramp. I haven't seen a case where someone goes immediately from a relaxed state to a tilted state. The further you proceed up the ramp of tilt, the harder it will be to recover, and you'll likely start experiencing other mental game leaks as well. By understanding the trigger, or the mental game leak, we have taken the first step to address and resolve it. The second step involves a cognitive behavioral therapy-like approach to correct the thoughts responsible for the emotional reaction. That could look something like this. Step 1, describe the problem in detail. Step 2, explain why it makes sense that you have this problem or why you think, feel, or react that way. Step 3, explain why the logic in step 2 is flawed. Step 4, come up with a correction to the flawed logic. And finally, step 5, explain why that correction is correct. And this exercise can also be found in Jared Tendler's Mental Game of Trading on page 64 and 65. The third and final step is to use awareness to notice when this trigger reappears in the future and then to apply the corrected logic that you would have just found by working through the exercise. This process helps to align our expectations, beliefs, and mental frameworks with reality and our goals. Negative emotional responses are usually a result of cognitive dissonance, as will become clear as we work through the examples. You may notice that in each case, tilt stems from the same root, wanting reality, our performance, the outcome, to be different from what it is. So to help us with this, let's go through ideas and concepts that will help us to think in the best way possible to get over our issues with tilt. I will refer back to these concepts repeatedly in the final part of the video where we go over the examples of tilt triggers, so it's worth sticking around as opposed to skipping straight to the end. There are a few things that underlay everything else that we'll be talking about in this video that I want to cover very quickly first, and we'll keep coming back to these ideas, so that's why I wanted to just open with this. The first thing is values, but more importantly, one value in particular, the value of being the best player possible, improving, performing well. Presumably, you guys hold this value if you're watching this video because you've decided that this value is important enough that you're willing to expend extra energy to go and study, to go on X or go on YouTube to go and find content that can help you with your problems, which suggests to me that you have a value to become a better player. This may seem like a benign point, but it will come back to this repeatedly and you'll see why it's important to highlight this. The next thing is principles. So principles are the ways in which we uphold or honor our values. So for example, if you decide that it's very important for you to be a kind person, that's a value of yours, you may spend extra time and effort developing more patience. Having that virtue is going to be essential in being a kind person. So similarly, we may go through a lot of really good concepts here that you would like to adopt that can become principles or ways that you're able to uphold your values of being the best player possible, improving and performing well. The next thing is awareness. This is how we gather information. And without awareness, we have no idea what's going on, and without any data points, we can't solve any problems. Awareness, some people might call it mindfulness, the ability to be present to the moment and be able to notice what actually is happening right now. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? And with that information, you'll be able to make really good decisions about your experience and how you should change it or how you should reframe it and how how it's affecting you. And that's what we need to do the work that we'll be doing today. Beliefs and expectations. This is the final point before we get into all of the bigger concepts. Now, beliefs and expectations, this is really the roots of a lot of our problems when it comes to tilt. Typically, we experience frustrations and we experience like negative emotions because the reality doesn't match up with what we believe or expect it should be. And so we need to be able to isolate what is the belief that doesn't make sense, what is the expectation that isn't realistic that we have. And then if we go through a process to correct that, like the exercise I mentioned previously, which we'll go through with some of the examples later in the video, we'll be able to correct that logic and we'll be able to smooth over that whole experience so that you don't have this jarring moment of frustration that starts to really affect your performance. Okay, helpful concept number 1, growth mindset. So it's something you have likely heard of before, and it is a very simple but very effective tool that we can use to reframe things to our advantage. Once again, we go back to that value of becoming the best player possible, to perform well, to grow, and the growth mindset really helps us to do this because what it does is it filters all of the stimulus that we get from the game into this is an opportunity for growth. This is an opportunity for growth. So we see everything as a challenge, as something that can make us better, as opposed to a reason to be frustrated or a reason to feel bad in any way, shape, or form. So for example, if you make a good play, awesome, you should do that again. You're on the path to repeating a behavior that seems to be helping you improve. If you are unsure as to whether you should have made that play, well, also good, because now you know that there's something you're unsure of, so there's a learning potential in the decision-making process there that can result in a improved play where you're like, yes, I should do this over and over again. So you're on the path to improving in that regard. And then lastly, if you make a bad play and it doesn't go too well for you, well, that's great, because additionally, it's telling you that maybe there's something here you shouldn't repeat. You shouldn't do this again. So it's another learning opportunity to get better. And so when we're able to look at mistakes or problems or things that happen that feel negative, just from, that kind of gut feeling of, oh God, that felt like, I didn't do well. I lost a gunfight. I lost the match. All of these things suddenly become growth, which is the whole goal. If we go back to that value again, that's the thing we care about. And so if we're consistently reinforcing that we're on the path of what we value, then that should help you to feel better about that thing not going so well. And equally, because you won't have as much of a frustrated reaction to that thing, you'll be able to stay curious about it and you'll be able to learn from it more effectively. And so if everything can be growth, which it can, then you're going to be experiencing a lot more gains through your experiences on the server, because you'll be less emotionally driven by whatever the emotional roulette is happening with, like, gunfights being won and lost and bad teammates, good teammates, like all of these variations that you can experience. And instead, you are going to have a consistent mental framework that everything is growth no matter what. So this, by the face of it, will help you to be a more emotionally stable player. So this is a very important one and a very helpful one to adopt. Acceptance is a big deal because there can be situations that feel pretty frustrating, even if we are really good at applying the growth mindset. It's more about how quick are we to recognize that A equals A. Reality is reality. No matter how much you dislike it, you must accept it. A player dropped from the game. Your teammates are really bad. These are just realities. And if we pass that through the growth mindset, okay, well, player dropped from the game. I have now a really challenging scenario in which I can try to get better. This could be a learning moment for me, and I'm just faced with a lot of challenge, and challenge equals growth. And the same thing with really bad teammates. Well, they may be really bad, but what if I try to figure out what resources I'm working with? What do I have to work with here? And how can I just accept that, look at it, be curious about it, and then figure out, okay, now I've got all of these like numbers. I can put it into an equation to try to solve the puzzle, because that's essentially what all of this is. Everything, all challenge is meeting, all challenge is something to be met with problem solving. And just, you got to figure it out. So sometimes you're going to have a harder challenge and sometimes you're going to have an easier challenge. And something I'll also remind you all of as well is that there is such a thing as limit training. And this is something that I think it's really, really valuable to do effective, especially with professional teams, because with professional players, they know how to play the game really well. And one of the issues you can run into as a professional player is being too routined and being too structured in how you do things. And so to limit a pro team, let's say they have a scrim block, and you say, okay, you can only win by using these parts of the map, or you can only win with these certain conditions. You can only use these types of utility. You can only do this or this or this. You're creating an artificial limitation, and that forces them to have to problem solve their way in a way that they're not used to doing. So it can actually be very helpful to learn as a player, to teach yourself new things. And so limit training of any kind is actually really, really great. And that's essentially the situation you're often in. You're throwing on the weight vest. So accepting the situation as quickly as possible, recognizing that you can't change reality, but instead you can try to just be curious about the information you're receiving here in this reality, then you can work with it and meet those challenges a lot more quickly. The illusion of control. This is something a lot of people struggle with, and it makes a lot of sense because we like to think as human beings that we can control a lot more than we actually can. And we have to be able to differentiate between the things that we can control and the things that we can't. Because it isn't fair, reasonable, or otherwise really sensible in any way that we should try to punish ourselves for things that we can't actually control at all. And so what we should do is we should actually try to instead create frameworks around the things that we can control so that we can reward ourselves for doing well in the situations that we can control. So you can control, largely speaking, your decision making and how you decide to make a play. You can't control the whether you hit the shot or not. Generally speaking, even the best athletes in the world will have mechanical variation to the executional performance. So they're going to miss shots, even no matter how amazing they are going to miss shots every so often. There's going to be that level of variance that exists. And so it would be foolish for us to punish ourselves on that variance. And equally, it's also the case that we can't really fix that during the performance. You can't focus on your aim and suddenly your aim is going to improve. You kind of have whatever you have walking into the match. And so it actually makes a lot more sense to focus on the tasks and focus on the decision-making process. And have I done a good job creating advantage and making a play that I want to habituate, that I feel like is fundamentally correct or puts me fundamentally in advantage? These are the things you should reward yourself for. And similarly, as I mentioned previously, if you make a mistake with your decision-making, this, again, we apply the growth mindset and we recognize that this is something we can learn from. So make sure that we don't try to control things we can't control, because that's just going to create that dissonance, create that mental anguish. And we need to make sure that we just don't care about those things because it's not reasonable to do so. So try to learn how to recognize between the things you can and cannot control. The ABC game, obviously one I've talked about a lot, and it's pretty deep in terms of how we can apply it. But for this video in particular, with the context of tilts, all we really need to be thinking about with the ABC game is that at any given point, you can be anywhere in your range between C and A. And again, if we talk about acceptance, that reality is reality, then we can't just magically be somewhere else in the range. All we have right now is where we are in our range. And some days, we might play really bad, and some days we might play really well. That just means that you're a more inconsistent player with a really, really wide range. And so you need to just accept and be curious about where your range is today, because it's data for you. With that awareness, what kinds of plays do I make when I'm in my C game? What kinds of emotions do I feel when I'm in my C game? And once you kind of get some of that information, you can start to work on problem solving it. If you notice that, for example, in your C game, that you overpeak a lot, instead of being frustrated and just like doing stuff, and overpeaking being one of them, if you stop to recognize that, hey, I overpeak a lot, I wonder why I do that, or I wonder what emotions are associated with that particular error. You might not necessarily even have to fix the trigger per se, but you can even just apply some tactical solutions or limit training where you say, okay, I know that I'm in my C game right now. I'm just like, I recognize that I'm not playing very well. And I know what this feeling is. And I don't know where in my range I am, but I know this is probably like towards the bottom. And so now you understand that, okay, well, it tends to be the case that I overpeak when I'm doing this. So now when you're in an overpeaking scenario, just recognize whenever there's a peaking scenario and make a rule. I'm never going to re-peak, for example. So this is not necessarily something that is going to be helpful for the long term, but in the short term of handling this problem, what it does is it forces you to not make that tactical error, and instead you're applying another form of limit training, where now you have to solve the problem by having this rule where you're never kind of overpeaking. So you're not repeating this bad habit as well. So you're starting to create a world where you can interface with your bad performance in a way that's positive, as opposed to just being frustrated and just trying to swing. And again, like the types of repeats that you make when you're frustrated or in your C game are probably pretty low quality to begin with. So this is one way that the ABC game is helpful and liberating, because you can just relax and be like, I can't control exactly where I am in my performance. Whatever I get is whatever I get. And all I'm supposed to do here is work with it and be curious about it. And the more curious I am about it, the more things I can learn about it, the more weaknesses I can target, and the more I can improve my fundamentals, the more I can improve my C game, and the quicker I can get into better performances. And you'll find that this type of thinking is really helpful, because a lot of people get stuck in bad performances because they aren't actually working on the things that put them in the bad performance. And then there's a feedback mechanism where they are now feeling like they have bad performances and they can't really solve it or control it. And so it just creates more bad performances. So we have to find a way to anchor ourselves to improving something. And this is one way to do it. And so hopefully that should help some of you as well. Overcoming outcome-oriented thinking. This is a really big deal because outcome-oriented thinking is encouraged by the game developers ultimately, because when you get a headshot, it feels good. The developers have made it feel really satisfying to get headshots and to, essentially get good stats on the scoreboard to win matches. There's all of these kind of dopamine buttons that are getting pressed, and it's because their objective is to have you just play the game as much as possible. Whereas if your objective is to become the best player possible, suddenly the way that they've set up the reward systems don't really align with the way that you want the reward systems to be. Because if you want to have good reward systems, then, again, as we mentioned, you can't control the mechanical execution necessarily, like not fully at least. You can't guarantee it. And so what we want to instead do is we want to reward ourselves for the decision that we commit to before we see an outcome. Because if we look at the long term of what being a good player is, I don't think anyone who's reasonable would suggest that just because you have, some bad games or some losses today, that means you're a bad player. We should be looking at who we are in terms of our skill as a player over a much longer time horizon. The vacuum of just one match or one day or even a week of play doesn't really say very much because of how complex these games are and how much learning we have to do to truly improve at them. There's a lot of skills, a lot of thinking that is required to be really good, and it takes a lot of time. So if we're reasonable with ourselves, then we should recognize that that's the truth, and that these outcomes of hitting the shot, missing the shot, of winning the match, losing the match, these aren't really good indicators at all as to whether what we're doing is good or not. So instead, we want to make sure that we're thinking about advantage and disadvantage. So this is a first principle framework as well that you can look at everything from in any type of competition. Because competition is more of a numbers game than you think, most likely, where it's all about creating statistical advantage through creating as many advantages as possible and leveraging them. Because that's the to and fro when it comes to anything competitive. I'm trying to get advantages over my opponent. They're trying to get advantages over me. I'm trying to force disadvantages for them. They're trying to force disadvantages for me. And it's just this back and forth of that. Now, the ways in which you try to do that are obviously very many and ranging, but ultimately that's what it comes down to. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that when we go into a fight, that we've created as many advantages as possible. And, maybe we've got like better positioning, we've got high ground, they've got low ground, we've got a timing advantage, we've got, teammates that could trade us, we've got utility advantage. There's all sorts of stuff that you can kind of figure out through playing of like, okay, this is a good position. It just gives me more options than my opponent. And this gives me the ability to disengage from the fight, whereas they'll be stuck in the open. There's lots of different ways you can get advantages. So by understanding how to see the game from this viewpoint, you'll be able to make higher quality decisions more of the time. And so again, we go back to growth mindset and we look at how we make a decision and we think, would I do that again? Am I not sure? And if it's bad, all of these three things are good if we're looking at them from that framing of learning from them and understanding how much advantage do they have? Was it enough in this situation for me to keep doing this type of decision? And I can give another example here because I love giving examples from poker because it's highly analogous to esports in many respects. if you're playing tournament poker, and we're going to ignore some of the edge cases and ignore some of the poker theory and the rest of it, but just for the sake of it, if you're playing a tournament, everyone's folded before you, you have, aces pre-flop, you're on the dealer button and you're wanting to collect the big blinds and the ante, and then the person on the big blind calls your shove with 2-7 off and you've got the aces, and then they kind of luck out on the river. Would you not do that play again? No, you should probably do that play again. You had the statistical advantage significantly, and so you should keep making that play. That was the correct play, even though the outcome in the sample size of 1 was negative. If you take it to the sample size of 1,000, you're coming out way, way, way ahead, and that's how we want to think about how we make decisions in the game. The mental game contract. This is something that I came up with like many, many, many years ago for myself as a player, and I haven't really seen anyone else talking about it. But for me, the mental game contract is something that is up to you to decide. What essentially it is much like you have a technique warm-up, an emotional warm-up, whatever types of warm-ups you're doing for your mechanics. I also added in something whereby if right before I'm pressing the Q button, or even as I'm sitting in a queue, I go over a list of all of the things all of the non-negotiables for me in the session. Because if you care about being a really good player, there should be very specific ways that you consistently respond to certain situations in the game. And obviously this is informed by you, because you have to know, your own pitfalls and the things that you need to avoid. So for example, for me, maybe it's stuff like, no matter what, I will always be in problem-solving mode. I will look at everything as a challenge, and I will solve, and I always just continue to solve problems. I will always keep my comms up no matter what. Just like things like this. It really depends on the situation, but these are behaviors, ways of thinking that you want to encourage consistency for. And so when you get to a point where in the game maybe you're losing some gas and you start to drop your focus, you start to get a bit frustrated or whatever it might be, that's the time to potentially stop, because you're recognizing that now you're kind of betraying that mental game contract that you had going into the ranked session. So this is something that has served me very well in keeping myself honest with my quality of practice, because being a consistent player requires consistent inputs in your practice. If your practice is all over the place and highly varied in the levels of focus and so on and emotions, then you're going to be less equipped to learn to the best of your ability. And we're going to be talking about this idea a little bit later as well, because there are ways in which you can receive small frustrations that might even feel imperceptible at times. And this will lead to a drop of focus and drop of performance. And then ultimately, think of it like you're in a gym. Focus is a finite resource you get every day. It's your gas tank. And so focus is being sapped by other things, like, again, negative emotions. Then your ability to essentially, let's use the gym as an example, as I mentioned, to do the big lift and to put enough force into it, or to be able to use weights that can actually help you to grow. If you don't have enough gas in the tank, you won't be able to do that. So you won't be able to hit the resistance and rep ranges that you need to grow. And similarly, if your focus is being drained by things, you're not going to be able to put the effort in that's going to really help you to grow and maintain high quality decision making. So you got to be very cautious of that as we are practicing. Mental game leaks compound. So frustration that can lead to these drops in focuses or loss in confidence. Over time, it just keeps compounding and compounding and compounding. So this is another place where awareness is very helpful, because we need to try our best to be aware as to when our mental game is taking some knocks, because if you are not aware of it, again, it's just this feedback loop that kind of spirals downwards, where it starts out, being a bit frustrated, losing a bit of focus. Where you lose a bit of focus, you're going to make worse decisions, or your game sense will not be as good because you're not going to be as dialed into all of the timings. So now you're going to be making just lower quality plays slightly, maybe, and then you'll start to get slightly worse results, and then your confidence will start to dwindle again. You'll start to get a bit more frustrated, and then with the frustration, you'll lose some more focus. You'll start to not have fun as much, or become a bit more tired or fatigued, and then you're going to start to lose concentration again. And it kind of spirals down and down and down. So we have to be as aware of these types of things as we possibly can, because mental game leaks compound if they're not dealt with. Focus on the job and not the executional performance. So I've already hinted at this with some of the previous points that we've made, but ironically, to perform well, we need to focus on the task, not just the performance. When we are aware that we aren't playing well, we start focusing more on that mechanical executional performance as opposed to the actual task, which makes us perform the task worse. Because generally speaking, when we're thinking about how executional performance really works, our mechanics, we're not thinking about them. They're a secondary thing that's happening in our mind. But if we bring that sort of more primary cognitive bandwidth to look at that task, which is, by the way, what happens when we start missing shots, when we feel like our mechanics are letting us down, our brains like tells us, yo, this is a problem. So we want to put attention on this problem. But if you put active kind of cognitive like focus on that problem, then you're not able to aim as well. You're not able to perform as well. And then you're also diverting bandwidth away from the places you need to have that bandwidth allocated to actually make good decisions. Because generally speaking, when you'll find this when you're in your A game. When you're in your A game, are you thinking of mechanics at all, your aim at all? No, you're completely dialed into like just reading the pulse of the game, like constantly looking at the mini map, like interpreting information, gathering information, thinking about what's going on, what are the plays I'm going to make, what is my job right now, and that's the kind of thinking that's actually going on with that conscious bandwidth. And the more conscious bandwidth or focus you can have on all of the information in the game to help you make decisions, the better quality your read of the timings will be, the better quality, therefore, then your plays will be. And then also your mechanics, which are kind of something that are acting in this like secondary fashion or more subconscious way, they're going to be like performing even better because you're hitting better timings, you're in more of an advantage, you're more confident and decisive. And so that really allows you to perform way better. So we want to always focus on the job and be aware if we're starting to focus on our mechanics because we're like, oh my God, I'm just like missing shots. And this is easier said than done at times because sometimes our mechanics feel like they're really, really, really underperforming. And so we start to question pretty much all of our plays. But once again, what you have to just go back to is what I've talked about previously, which is a decision good? We can't always make a great decision with regards to our mechanics, but we can try to really focus on really good decisions. And if you feel like your mechanics are really letting you down, again, let's not resist it. Let's just be curious about it. But ultimately, what we want to do is we want to make adjustments. We don't want to overcompensate. So we can adjust to try to make decisions that are more focused, or less focused around mechanical performance, but we're finding more advantages in other ways that can allow us to maybe have a bit more of a chance. So we're kind of acknowledging that our mechanics aren't super hot right now, but that's okay. We're going to use that as limit training. So again, we're reframing that so that we can take advantage of it for learning purposes. Okay, so now in the final part of the video, we will go through the examples of the events, beliefs, and expectations that trigger us and make us angry and performing poorly, and maybe trigger, as a result of those frustrations, maybe tactical errors as well, running it down and going for angles. Okay, so the first place I want to start though is going to be Steele, who is playing from a professional context, and he gave me this top one. And the reason why I want to start with this one is because it's a bit trickier and different to all of the other examples, because all the other examples are not from the professional playing context or like the serious competition context. And it is different. So let's go through this one real quick. And we're going to run it through this process. Describe the problem in detail. Well, teammates not doing their action, rotating, communicating, using utility, taking timings, etc. And what is the reaction? Overcompensation, doing more to Steele's own personal detriment in terms of his performance to make up for the teammates' errors. So that's the problem. And before we go into step 2, I'm going to mention to you guys why we should differentiate this from the other examples. As a professional player, you're signed to a team, you're salaried to a team, and therefore there are explicit and implicit expectations about your conduct, your behaviors, and so on. So, you're scrimming, you're going to be practicing specific things, playing certain roles. And so when we get into the match and suddenly you're not sort of, in a sense, holding up your end of the bargain, well, yeah, it makes sense that like Steele would be frustrated or even resent his teammates at that point because we just spent all this time practicing. We are paid by an org. This is our careers. We're professionals, and you're not holding up your end of the bargain in this particular case. And obviously that's different to a ranked game where like there's no such obligation, there's no such expectation that a random teammate that you drop in with is supposed to do anything that you want them to do. But in this case, There is a true reason to experience frustration and other emotions as well. Now, explain why it makes sense that you have this problem or think, feel, or react that way. So we're going to look at both frustration and the overcompensation. So, and I can infer the frustration based on the context. Now, the reason why overcompensation makes sense is because we got to win. We're paid to do this. This is the match right now. We can't just chill and say, hey guys, can we play another day when my teammates are playing better? No, you have to perform on demand. And that is the nature of professional play and playing for the org and being, taking your career seriously. And if your results are bad, you might get cut. So it makes sense that in this particular situation, when things are going bad, someone's got to step up. Someone's got to take the charge and fix these problems, make up for them so that we can still win. So that's how the overcompensation would make sense. The frustration would make sense because, well, these guys aren't holding up their end of the bargain. We kind of covered it already. And so it makes sense that there would be frustration with the teammates here for putting Steele in a position where he's now performing he's performing worse is what he's saying because he's overcompensating as a result. So it's very easy and simple for Steele to connect the overcompensation directly as a result of his teammates not doing what they're supposed to do. Makes total sense. Explain why the logic in step 2 is flawed. Well, the frustration, it's not flawed exactly because, there's there might be this much frustration, but really how much frustration do we really need or is really realistic? Maybe we can dial it down a little bit so there's only this much frustration. So we're managing the emotion. And we can do that because, my teammates are allowed to have a shit day. It's a different thing entirely. Maybe if they went out the night before and were really irresponsible and were out like drinking and got no sleep or something like that, that's a little bit of a different situation. Maybe I have a bit more frustration there instead of this like the full amount, but there is still an argument to have some frustration, just maybe not as much. And additionally, the frustration doesn't really help me or help them to have, and it serves us all for me to minimize it as much as possible. And I can still have some frustration, but still be open and focused, open with my teammates and focused on my tasks at hand. And that's going to increase our chances to win. So we're drawing it back to the value here where we want to win. And that's the thing that we care the most about. So if we're really, really frustrated, it doesn't really serve us because that's going to come across to the teammates as well. So the frustration, we gotta be a bit more chill there with that. The overcompensation also is flawed because, Steele has basically said it with the word overcompensation. He hasn't said compensation. He said overcompensation. This is a tactical leak. He knows it's bad. He knows this is putting him in a place where he's performing worse. And so he's performing worse actually because he's reacting to the situation improperly. This is actually not his teammates' fault. It's actually not correct to blame them for this because he's looking at the act of what's going on in the server and he's doing something that is less optimal than what his reaction should be, which is to find what the compensation should be so that he avoids overcompensation, but he's still staying true to the reality that the equation, the numbers are a little bit different because his teammates aren't doing all of the correct things. So he just has to figure out what the compensation is. And this will allow him also to stay sort of more engaged with the game. So we're going through step 4 here as well, where we're finding the correction to the flawed logic. Where, okay, we want the compensation, we want a little bit of frustration, but we want to be in a state though, where we are still playing in such a manner that we're open and vulnerable to our teammates, that they're not scared of us. Because if they can feel resentment, if they can feel a lot of frustration, if we're giving it to them and giving shit to them, we're trying to micromanage them and be aggressive with them, then they are going to go into their shells even more. It's less likely they'll recover, and that means we're less likely to win the game. They're less likely to perform well. I'm less likely to perform well because now I'm seeing them perform even worse. So it's a spiral that hurts everybody. So we want to index for maximizing our chance to win. And so to do that, a little bit of frustration is okay, but we've got to compartmentalize the chunk that's left over, and we want to put that somewhere else that can be used productively later. So, okay, when stuff like this happens, can't change it right now. I accept it. Acceptance. We're talking about acceptance. I'm accepting that this is reality. I can't micromanage them out of this scenario. They know how to rotate. They know how to communicate. They've been doing it all week. They know how to use utility and they know how to take the timings. If they're not doing it right now, it's not because they need a reminder. It's not because they can't, they just forgot or something. it's because there's something else going on that is preventing them from doing it. Whether it's a mental game leak, like the pressure, or whether it's something else entirely, there is something that's preventing them from doing this. So I also cannot micromanage them out of this scenario. Nor should I do that, because it's going to be an overcompensation, and I'm going to start affecting my own performance as well and making it less likely that we win. So this is another reason why the overcompensation doesn't make sense, because we can't control the uncontrollable, the illusion of control. And if we try to do so, we're going to frustrate ourselves even more. So we are now starting to explain on step 5 whether the correction is correct, because of the illusion of control, because we want to maximize our chances to win, because we want to maximize our teammates' ability to come to us, and we can act like a team. Because again, if they continue to perform poorly after we use some interventions and we're moving forward with the roster, and this keeps happening, the players will get cut. But until the point at which the players get cut, I have to, as a professional player, I have to do my best to make the team win regardless of the situation. I have to be committed to my teammates, and I have to find a way to win as a team. And if I lose as a team. And that's the reality of being on a professional team. And this is one of the realities too, is that it's not easy. You're going to be in a position where you've got to manage your emotions so that, again, shit's not how you want it to be, but that's just how it is. And you just have to figure out how to manage that the best that you can. So that's why these corrections are correct. And so hopefully, we can reduce the emotional outcomes. We can be more of a teammate. We can also, instead of overcompensating, we can kind of compensate instead. And again, Steele can look at the VODs and kind of realize or recognize, okay, what ways was I really making mistakes here with the overcompensation? What should I actually be doing? And as you actually start to help yourself to manage the emotional realities of this, and you reduce the frustration and you manage it and you kind of put it in the right places, you'll also have less of an inkling to want to do this. You'll actually be more of a mind that you can act more rationally with how you make your adjustments, as opposed to being overly emotional and then leading to this tactical leak. So we want to hit it from multiple avenues here. So that's Steele's example. Okay, so running through this. And so with any mental game leak, with any mental game leak, and especially the tilt, we want to try to nip stuff in the bud. So as soon as we're aware that a problem is coming up, we're hitting a trigger, we want to remember us going through all of this whole process, and then we get to this corrected logic, and then we remember the corrected logic. And so every time this comes up in the future, we keep doing this until what we've done is we've effectively changed the very nature of how we perceive the event or the belief or the expectation, so that it is instead something that can serve us and no longer tilt us, because we don't want that, obviously. That's the whole point of the video. We don't want to tilt. We want to not tilt. Okay, so for the rest of all of these in the teammate box, this is kind of it in a nutshell. Your teammates have no obligation to you whatsoever. There is no explicit or implicit expectation that they should do what you want, play how you want, know the things that you know about the game, take it as seriously as you, talk on a mic, not talk on a mic, anything like that. You can, of course, ask your teammates to do things, but they are within their right to say no. They're within their right to not respond. They're within their right to completely ignore you. And that's okay. That's the reality of it. Also, there are players that will be playing ranked that do not take competition as seriously as you. They like a little bit of competition. They like the elo going up and going down, but they don't really truly care about getting good like you may. And just because you have that standard, it doesn't mean that anyone else has to have that standard in ranked. The reality is that anyone queues up for ranked for any number of reasons. And it could be the case that they don't have a mic, or they're not talking because they are really depressed, and this is the only escapism that they like to indulge in to help them cope with their life at the moment. Could be the case that they're really stressed out about other things, or that they decide they like to play whilst on Discord with their friends with music and podcast playing. That could also be what they have decided to do, and they are well within their right to play the game any which way they like. And the sooner that we all accept this, the easier it is to manage all of this stuff and get to the good thing, which is this next step, which is you have to accept the reality that all of this is true and work with what you can work with. You can't make stuff magically happen just because you want it to. You can't make the world just do what you want. Otherwise, in my background, I'd have millions of dollars in cash just stacked up around me if I could just magic it from thin air. That's not how reality works. You've got to take the things that exist, that are in front of you, and you have to do the best that you can with them. And the sooner you recognize what you have in front of you and that you're dealing with it correctly, the better your results will be. And so this is a very important point with all of this, because what people tend to do is they tend to think that they're entitled to that their teammates should do specific things. Only in the example of the teammates in this not doing their action, for the steals example, where it's a professional play, does that actually count? Because in that particular case, again, they are signed to a professional team. So there are literally agreements that are both explicit and implicit with regards to what they should be doing. And if they decide to try to play in a professional team and not take it seriously, they're defrauding the team that signed them. I'll be literally being fraudulent because they're not going to be upholding their end of the deal of what they're doing. So with all of that said, we can look at some of these emotions real quick on this side. Why not? Let's go through them. So sometimes people will experience anger. Usually if you get to anger, you probably need to stop if you're like legitimately kind of like, I'm going to smash stuff type of angry. Sometimes there's like a little bit of like an outlet, and that's okay. But as long as you can differentiate between that and, which I would say, like if you look at Nico, for example, Nico obviously is famous for like the desk smashing moments. And when I look at Nico in those moments, I don't think that he's tilting. I think that he is just getting an emotional release because what has just happened goes against his expectation of like winning a moment or getting a clutch, and so he gets some anger. However, he is immediately dealing with it and processing it, and that's it, and it's gone. He is not allowing that to kind of stay inside him, and it's not affecting him beyond that point. And this is the way that he manages his emotions, and that's totally fine, because it works for him. It's not interrupting his performance. If you watch Nico play, I don't know that I've seen him do a move like that and then like just be garbage for the rest of the game. It's often the case anytime I've seen that Nico gets his little bursts of anger. He like just allows the emotion to happen. He expresses it, and then he moves on, and that's it. And it's because of his high standards. That's where this comes from. It comes from his high standards for himself. So it's actually coming from a place that's actually kind of positive in a respect. He expects a lot of himself. He takes himself really seriously as a competitor. And so that's why he has the anger there. And he could choose to just bottle it up. Or he could choose to use some of these other methods that we've been going through. But he has chosen a method that works for him, and that's totally fine. I just wanted to mention that because I'm sure people will probably mention this potentially in the comments. However, for most people, they're not experiencing it in the way that Nico is, especially in that professional context. They're experiencing anger when you're in a ranked game. This is not okay, because if we think about how activated you can get with anger and how destructive it can be in a ranked game, again, the context is different. You're in a place where you shouldn't be feeling like really angry. And if you are, then something is going awry, because you're allowing your day to be ruined. You're allowing your nervous system to get mega activated in a way that's very negative for you. So if you ever get to that point where you've got the fight or flight is really kicking in, you've got all of the chemicals flooding through your system, adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, all the rest of it, take a break. You actually have to take a break. At that point, you have to let those chemicals just run their course, and you have to just chill, because you're not going to be good to anyone at that point. Your limbic system is really activated. Your ability to think rationally is completely compromised. So you just have to let it pass. And that's just sadly how it goes. So just wanted to make that point, because if you do get to tilt, it's awful. Like true tilt is truly awful, and you just have to let it run its course. But hopefully that'll be an incentive for you to not allow yourself to get there again in the future. Okay, so just wanted to make that point about anger. Okay, so let's go to the poor performance ones. Poor performance. Okay, so missing shots. Well, okay, we can kind of run this through this logical framework again. And again, these concepts I've talked about before, you're going to hear them come up again. So missing shots, the event, I suppose, that leads to the poor performance is missing shots. And it might be because you're playing below expectation, for example. So describe the problem in detail. I'm missing shots and kind of playing below my expectation. And because of that, I get angry. I get a confidence drop. I make bad decisions. It leads to tilt. So explain why it makes sense that you have this problem, or why you think, feel, or react that way. Well, it makes sense that I have this problem because, I was playing really well the last like couple of weeks, and I'm starting to have like a couple of bad days, and I expect to play a lot better. And I'm trying to rank up, I'm trying to reach these goals, and it doesn't. And I feel like I'm just losing to worse players, and I know that I'm better. I know that I'm a better player, and so it's like really frustrating to play like this, and it's making my confidence go down as well, because now I just can't be certain of like how well I can play, and I'm missing these shots, and I just feel like a pleb. I just feel like an absolute noob when this is happening. Well, explain why the logic is flawed. Well, the logic is flawed because of the ABC game. The ABC game is why this logic is flawed, because I have a performance range, and anytime you have a performance, you are in this range. It doesn't matter like where you are, it's reality. That's who you are. It's a part of you. And the sooner you accept that, the better. And so playing below expectation, well, what are you expecting? You're expecting to not be you? Because this is literally you. It's a part of you. You are capable of playing this badly, and you're as capable as playing as well as you have played. You're not capable, at this point at least, in controlling precisely where you are in your range. When you become really good and very skilled, and you really understand your performance well, you are able to kind of go up and down the range like a lot more easily, because you just really understand it very well. But that's really something that only professional players will likely have access to, I would say, for the most part. But otherwise, we just have to recognize that if we're playing below an expectation, like your expectation is faulty in the first place, because you're just going to play how you're able to play. And so this is why the logic in step 2 is flawed. Okay, so I come up with a correction to that flawed logic. So the correction would be that I need to be curious about my performance, because if I do that, I'll be less likely to perform this poorly in the future. If I'm curious about how I'm performing, so instead of getting frustrated with it and angry with it, if I just accept that this is my performance, I own it, and I'm like, okay, well, what kind of mistakes am I making when I'm performing this poorly? Like, what are the kinds of errors I'm making? Am I like over peaking? Is it that I feel really tired? Am I just easily frustrated and impatient? As you start to like work out these different qualities, again, this is an ABC game concept of your performance, and you're curious about what's going on. You're curious because you recognize that this curiosity is giving you awareness to recognize, oh, these are the qualities of the weaknesses, and these are the types of weaknesses. I can now isolate those and work on those. I can focus on these weaknesses in like my other games. I can spend the next couple of weeks focusing on these few weaknesses that I noticed. And I now know that I can perhaps eliminate these weaknesses altogether. And because of that, I will then kind of make my C game better. And because my C game's better, I'll be less likely to fall into this like level of performance again. And so just by being realistic and honest about that, about how this all works, you're now in a place where you don't have to feel angry. You don't have to have as much of a confidence drop, because you recognize this is all okay. This is all normal, and you can work your way out of the problem. A lot of the times when people get really stressed out by things, it's because they don't know what the solution is. And as soon as they find the solution, the stress starts to abate, because they recognize that they're on a path to, quashing the problem. And that's what hopefully I can help you with here. So obviously we went through why the logic was flawed, and we also came up with a correction to the flawed logic as to how we should see it through the lens of the ABC game. And then we explained why that correction is correct, because once again, it goes back to our value of improving as a player. We've applied the growth mindset and the ABC game to make sure that we are getting the wins, we're getting the growth that we're looking for, and that we can leave these types of performances behind. And by the way, like, leaving those types of performances behind, there's always going to be stuff you're weak at. So you're always going to be working on stuff, but you will improve a lot more quickly if you can stay curious and stay focused on improvements. Okay. Letting the team and teammates down. And this is kind of similar to from pressure from teammates preventing me from playing my game, forcing me to start playing outside of my comfort. And also, this also is connected to trying to take control of performance leading to worse performance. And I would say it's also for some people connected to self-blame, self-loathing, and it can also be connected to eventually like shutting down as a result as well, or even overthinking. So a lot of these like issues are connected to very similar problems. So let's talk about this a little bit. So describe the problem in detail. Okay, letting my teammates down, and then I also get pressure from my teammates. from which kind of prevents me from playing comfortably. So essentially, you're getting all this pressure from your teammates about how you should play, and it's really impacting how like your performance. And because you're trying to sort of take control of your performance, you're trying to like deliver for the team in the ways that they're asking. You're also kind of playing worse. So that's the problem in detail. So explain why it makes sense that you have this problem. Well, I want to be a good teammate. I want to perform well for the team. I want to be a part of the win. I want to ensure that I can contribute and be someone that's valuable on the team. And so when I feel like I'm not feeling that way, I start to overthink things. I start to blame myself. Maybe even I start to hate myself because I feel like I'm the problem, and I start to shut down eventually because, or I start to overthink and second guess myself. Explain why the logic is flawed. Well, you're allowed to have a bad game. You're allowed to, you can only perform as well as you can perform, and not any better and not any worse. And you don't necessarily get to control where you are at in your range in a given game. And so you just have whatever you have to work with. And if the teammates are like good supportive teammates, they're not going to blame you for a bad performance. If they're bad teammates, they will blame you for that performance. So the logic is flawed because you can only do what you can do, and it's definitely valiant that you want to do stuff for the team, but again, you can only do what you're capable of doing. Come up with a correction to the flawed logic. Well, what we should instead do is by recognizing that we can only do what we can do, is we can just tell the team like what we're comfortable in doing or where we think that we're best, and they're going to try to work with me if they're good teammates. And I can suggest things too, and this can also help me to kind of problem solve this situation. And this should really help the team actually get to a better result, because if I'm more comfortable, the team will be more comfortable overall. So this correction is correct because what we're acknowledging is that ultimately, we can only perform as we can perform. I know I've repeated that a lot. And ultimately in these situations, when you're getting all of this pressure and like feeling bad, you shouldn't feel bad because you literally can't change this fact. And the feeling bad about it all is only going to make you play worse. And again, we care about growth and we care about actually improving. So we're not going to get to that goal or that value by blaming ourselves for being bad. The whole point is that we're not good. The whole point is that we are trying to get better and we're trying to have good experience in our practice. And so it doesn't make sense that we have any obligation to do anything more than we're able to do. And if our teammates are not on board with that, then they're arseholes, essentially. They're bad teammates, because a good team should try to work with their team and try to work with the strengths and the weaknesses of the team. Okay, let's see. The game out of my control is also like a fairly common one, like varying forms of this. We talked a lot about the illusion of control, which definitely applies here. Being able to differentiate between what you can control and what you can't control. Looking at decision making being the sort of be all and end all of your reward system, because you can control that, and just kind of like putting less weight on the outcome of anything. Because also ultimately we need to think long term, because the long term thinking is much more representative of our skill as a player, because it's a long journey. There's a lot of complex skills that you have to learn over time, and so it's very unreasonable to imagine that you could suddenly become really, really good or make significant changes to your performance within a day, a week, a month, even in some cases. Sometimes it takes months to see like significant performance boosts, because what you have to do is you have to work on all of these different pieces of your game. And then sometimes it takes like a few months for it all to come together, all these improvements. And so sometimes you're just kind of feeling like you suck for a long time until you get better. And because of that reality, of how improving works in complex esports games, it's not that the game is out of your control necessarily. It's just the nature of how everything works. And so if you just recognize that, then you focus on the things you can control, then you're going to be okay in this regard. So if we run one of these things through, let's like no control over my performance. Well, we already talked about the ABC game. So I feel like it kind of covers a lot of this, because the ABC game framework is essentially saying that yes, there are elements you can't control, but you want to stay curious and keep working on everything. Okay, so let's talk about, I know I'm missing something here real quick. Autopilot. Autopilot is something we've got to be careful of. I wanted to talk about this one because autopilot can happen because of non-mental game issues. So, fatigue, stress in your life, because essentially autopilot is is, where is your gas going? You've got a finite amount of energy when you're playing for focus. And if you have a very, very long day, you're going to have less focus or a lower quality of focus than when you start playing. Versus when you're fresh in the day and you haven't spent much energy yet. You're coming off a good sleep, you're energized, you're alert. So there are going to be physiological factors that can affect your focus tank, as it were. And there's also other things that can take from that tank. So if you're really stressed, you had a fight with your girlfriend, your parents are on your back for some reason, you got exams coming up, and you're really stressed out about it. There's all sorts of things that can kind of really steal away some of that focus energy, and then can kind of play in the back of your head. So that's stuff that can harm focus, but equally mental game stuff can as well. So if you're experiencing frustrations, then those frustrations will kind of knock your focus down a little bit, because now you're having to deal with these like emotional distractions and which require energy, and it's going to throw you off a little bit. And so you're going to be more likely to jump into an autopilot mode over a series of frustrations, because the frustrations start to tire you out. It's like, oh God, I gotta keep trying. Oh man, there's like so much friction just to stay engaged with the game, and I'm getting all these negative like feedbacks. And I keep getting these negative feedbacks, and it just like wears you down. And so, ultimately, you get into this autopilot state where your practice is going to be worse because you're not applying your full degree of focus, and so you're not going to be challenging yourself. Like, think of it like the gym. Like if you go into the gym and let's say you do you do running for 60 minutes, right? And then you're like, okay, I'm going to start doing heavy lifts now. And you've already exhausted yourself like from a cardiovascular standpoint, and now you're expecting to like get insane lifts. Well, you might be able to lift, but you won't be able to lift for the amount of reps and the amount of resistance that actually allows you to get adaptations muscularly, which is what you're looking for. Maybe hypertrophic or just strength, whatever it is you're looking for. You won't have enough gas in the tank suddenly to push yourself to actually achieve growth. And I think people need to recognize the difference here, because a lot of people play when they're in a very bad position to actually learn anything or to challenge themselves. Because much like the gym where you're like pushing yourself against the boundaries to try to reach new heights, similarly with focus, that's the fuel that's required to push yourself with decision making, to push yourself to do new things and to see new opportunities and to execute to a higher level, because your game sense and your game knowledge it interacts with your focus to basically give you the ideas as to what the plays should be. And so if you have the highest quality focus, you're going to get the best information from the game, and you're going to be so engaged with the information, you'll see things that you wouldn't maybe otherwise see if you're in autopilot mode. And so you're kind of harming your own ability to grow if you're staying in autopilot mode too much. So you got to be cautious that when you fall into this, that you're aware of it and you recognize its limitations for your ability to get better. Okay, the confidence drop. This is obviously something that is somewhat unavoidable. If you are in your C game, you're going to be like, a part of being in your C game is less confidence, because the confidence is also a realistic reflection of how you're performing right now to some extent. And so it makes sense that you'd be less confident if you're down here. We just want to make sure that we're not lacking confidence in a way that is vastly below where it should be. Which it can be through mental game leaks, because it's okay to like not feel super confident here, but there is a difference between not actively feeling like confident and like really feeling like a piece of shit and like you can't do anything. Like there is like a level of too much of a reaction there of underconfidence, and so we want to just try to manage that as best as we can, so that we're never in a spot where we can't make a decision or we second guess every decision because we're like, oh, I can't pull it off. That's the level of confidence we don't ever want to get to. So again, by working on all these triggers and so on, and reducing the intensity of them or removing them entirely, using some of these frameworks and these concepts, we should be able to stay in a better place to perform, to manage our emotions, and to prevent tilt. So I hope this was helpful for you guys listening. And if you enjoyed this, let me know, and I will see you for the next one. Oh, and check out my Patreon if you want to see more mental game stuff. I've got a lot going on there.